As you know, this Thursday we celebrate the 4th of July, the 248th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. The preamble to the Declaration has words that most of us know pretty well. The authors of the Declaration said that all people have an unalienable right given by God to I said we could all remember it. Now I can't remember it. Boy, this is embarrassing. The right to life, the right to liberty, and the right to the pursuit of happiness. The right to life, to be, to exist. The right to liberty, the freedom of movement, freedom of thought, freedom of expression. And the right to the pursuit of happiness, the opportunity and the power, the authority to seek after what gives meaning to our lives. One of the things that I like to do in preparing to preach is I like to just go online and search for meaningful quotes from literature, from speakers, from essays, from leaders, just to kind of remind myself of things that people throughout time have said on a given topic. I'm ashamed to admit that most of the quotes that I uncovered, I couldn't remember. I knew that I had read them before somewhere along my education, but somehow they had kind of slipped off into the crevices of my memory, and I couldn't remember them. I'll tell you what I do remember. I remember lines from movies about freedom. That sticks in my brain. One of the ones that I remember, and I'm sure you remember, was from the mouth of Mel Gibson playing the Scottish Knight William Wallace. They can take our lives, but they cannot take our freedom. Yeah, you remember that line. It's a great movie line. It's really sad that it's probably not historical, but it's a great movie line. We remember things like that. It's also true that popular music offers some things that participate in the conversation about freedom. In 1965, the Rolling Stones sang, "I'm free to do what I want any old time. I'm free any old time to get what I want." And of course, 4 years later, they had apparently gained some wisdom because then they sang, "You can't always get what you want." We learned on the news this week that if you, in an act of political protest, storm the green at the PGA tournament, the right to liberty may no longer apply to you. I guess the Stones were right. You can't always get what you want. And the pursuit of happiness does not guarantee achieving happiness. Well, Jesus had some things to say about freedom too. In the Gospel of John, chapter 8, Jesus is speaking to a crowd gathered near the temple. And in that crowd were people who thought highly of Jesus, and there were people in the crowd that thought poorly of Jesus. And we read, beginning in verse 31, Jesus said to the Jews who had believed in him, "If you continue in my word, you are truly my disciples. And you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free." And they answered him, "We are descendants of Abraham and have never been slaves to anyone. What do you mean by saying you will be made free?" And Jesus answered them, "Very truly I tell you, everyone who commits sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not have a permanent place in the household. The son has a place there forever. So if the Son makes you free, you will be free indeed." Now, Jesus is speaking to people who were fans of Jesus, people who had perhaps the beginnings of faith. They were open to what he was saying. They were open to what he was teaching. But Jesus is making a distinction between being a fan and being a follower, a distinction between being a disciple and just being an observer. Now, being a disciple means being a serious student. Being a disciple of Jesus means being a serious student of what Jesus taught, looking for life change. When I was in college, I took a class in French. I didn't take the class because I was particularly interested in French. I took it because I needed to check a box and I needed to pass a class. And it was at a good time for my schedule. So I took a class in French, and the teacher was French. She was from Perpignan in the south of France near Spain. I don't know if all French people think that all Americans are dumb, but I'm pretty sure she thought we were dumb. And maybe we deserved it. I did have an advantage over my classmates in that I was able to articulate the letter R the way the French do. That R sound that's near the back of the throat. That's not the way we Americans say the letter R, but that's the way it happens in the French language. And I was the only one of my classmates that could make that sound. I think that it made my grade move up from a D plus to a C minus. But here's the thing. I didn't learn how to make that sound by study, by practice, by hard work. I had learned how to make that sound as a kid watching old Pink Panther movies. The actor Peter Sellers played the bumbling French detective of Jacques Clouseau, and I would imitate what I heard in that movie, and that's how I learned to make that sound. I was not a serious student of French. I was not a disciple of the French language. Learning a little bit of French did not change my life. On the contrary, all I remember from that class is the phrase, je ne sais pas, which means I don't know. That's all I remember. I was not a disciple of French. A disciple, friends, is not a casual learner. A disciple is a serious student who is looking for life change. And that's the contrast that Jesus was pointing out that day. He was drawing a contrast between being a casual learner and a serious disciple. The difference between being a fan and being a follower. Now, most of you may remember a fad from several years ago with the bracelets, "What would Jesus do?" WWJD. You know, people wore it on bracelets, some people had it on t-shirts or on bumper stickers. What would Jesus do? It's not really a bad question, to be honest, but I think there's a question we need to ask before that question, and that question is, what did Jesus do? Before we're going to start talking about what would Jesus do in our particular context, we need to have a good grasp on what Jesus did and what Jesus said. See, I think, friends, that modern followers of Jesus often find themselves positioned between two choices. One choice is to sort of fabricate a Jesus out of our own imagination that's fashioned out of our own preferences, our own values, our own moral compass, and even more importantly, what the moral compass and values of our culture is. That's one Jesus that we see people talking about in the world today. And another Jesus is the Jesus that is revealed in the scriptures, particularly in the Gospels. Now, obviously, you know which one I think is the better way to go. I think to try to connect with a Jesus that is out of our own imagination is a Jesus that's made in our own image, that looks an awful lot like us. It's funny how that works. But yet our spiritual ancestors passed along these stories to us for a reason. Now, yes, I know the Bible can be complicated. The Bible can be strange. There are things in the Bible that are hard to understand. And even if we do understand them, they can be hard to take. I get that there's a lot of tension between what we know about the way the world works and what the Bible seems to be trying to communicate. There's a lot of tension between different parties in the culture wars these days and what it seems like the Bible says. I know all of that's true. But yet, those who believed in Jesus long before we did, they really believed that we needed to know and have these texts, these documents, these stories, these episodes in human history. They felt like we needed to have them. And I think that it's worth considering that there is something in those pages for us to discover. For the past 2,000 plus years, millions of people have experienced a changed life because of reading and studying and believing these stories and drawing lessons for living and lessons about how to relate to the God who made us from those pages. Now, I will tell you this is a little practical bonus. It's not a part of the message. It's just a little add-on value for you. If you've never read the Bible, one of the worst things you can do is to treat it like any other book and read from the front cover to the back cover. You will not make it. You'll probably do okay through Genesis, you'll do okay through Exodus, but you get to Leviticus 3 chapters in, you're done. It just gets too dense, it gets too complicated. It's really hard to understand what it's getting at. If you want to read the Bible for the first time, start with one of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. I don't care which one, just pick one and start with that. And then read one of the other three, and then read them all till you've gotten comfortable and familiar with the Gospels themselves. They're much easier to read than Leviticus or Revelation for that matter. Read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and then go on to read other things as you are able to do. It's worth your time to read the entire Bible at least once. But don't try to read it cover to cover, because you'll find it to be a very frustrating exercise. Grasp the gospel stories, then move on to other things. Okay, there you go, little added bonus. But I do think that we have to know Jesus as revealed in the Gospels, because that is the Jesus that has been passed on to us from history. Jesus said, if you continue in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. Now, the Jewish crowd that was gathered around him that day, they had a retort. They had a response to Jesus saying that. They said, we are descendants of Abraham and have never been slaves to anyone. What do you mean by saying you will be made free? Now, it's a very interesting response on their part, because from the days of Abraham until the days of Jesus, the people of Israel had been taken captive and made slaves over and over and over again. And even at that very moment, when that conversation was taking place, the people of Israel were under Roman occupation, and they lived under the thumb of the emperor. So it was kind of really audacious, and even it showed a profound lack of self-awareness to say we've never been slaves to anyone, because they've often been slaves. But let's just leave that off to the side for a moment. The point is, they were not thinking about freedom in the context that Jesus was talking about freedom. They understood freedom as an outcome of their national identity and their historical genealogy. Because we are children of Abraham, because we are the offspring, the progeny of the man that God picked of all the people God could have picked to create a people that would impact the world and all of human history. We're a part of that special, sacred, divine movement and moment. So therefore, we are free. And Jesus was saying, in effect, well, you're not as free as you think you are. You're not as free as you think you are, because everyone who lives in sin, who commits sin, who has habits and patterns of sin that are unresisted and unbroken, that person is a slave to sin. Now, I love the connection here that Jesus makes between truth and freedom on one hand, and between falsehood and slavery on the other. It's a wonderful dichotomy. Truth and freedom, falsehood and slavery. Jesus said, the truth will make you free. Now, every one of us, I'm sure, has had a conversation with our doctor that went something along the lines of, you need to exercise daily and you need to eat better. Is there anybody in this room that has not had that conversation? That is over 15 years old. It's a common conversation between doctors and patients. You got to exercise and you got to eat better. But yet, we lie to ourselves. One more donut won't hurt anything. And 10,000 donuts later, we're still telling ourselves, one more donut won't hurt anything. Well, we all know where the outcome of that goes. That eventually leads you to a very difficult, painful place. But yet, friends, that is the way we behave. We lie to ourselves to do what we want to do. And while we're thinking we're free to do what we want to do, we're actually creating bondage for ourselves. I once heard a comedian say, you know what, my motto is eat right, exercise daily, die anyway. I said that to my doctor, and my doctor said, yeah, but there's a difference between dying peacefully in your sleep and dying in a puddle of drool in a nursing home. And I thought, ooh. We lie to ourselves to enable us to do what we want to do. For those ancient Jews, their idea of freedom was wrapped up in their sense of belonging to the people of Abraham. I think for us Americans, our idea of freedom is wrapped up in two words: independence and autonomy. Independence and autonomy. I think the most prevalent American value is that I do what I want to do. I do what I want to do. I used to think that that was just an attitude that people who did not follow Jesus exhibited. But I've lived in this body long enough to know that even Christians have that demeanor. I do what I want to do. It's just what I want to do. It's a little more sanctified because I'm with Jesus. But that, I think, is the most common American belief about freedom is I do what I want to do. I'm my own person. I'm an autonomous being. And yet, we often lie to ourselves, not realizing that self-deception doesn't lead to freedom. It leads to a reduction or a loss of freedom. The pursuit of happiness can ironically lead to less happiness. Proverbs 14:12 says it wonderfully well. There is a way that seems right to a person, but its end is the way to death. Now, that's harsh. That's blunt. That's just right in your face. But I think it's also true, and it's not the first time or the only time that the Bible discusses making choices in the context of life and death. It was one of Moses' final words during his final sermon: choose life or choose death. And Jesus in the book of Revelation, he says, look, I want you to be hot or cold. I want your yes to be yes or your no to be no. And if you're going to be right here in the middle, well, you remember the line. He says, it makes me puke. The Bible calls us to that either or distinction of life or death, of truth or slavery. Here's one of the things that I have learned about me and about watching people is that no one does something self-destructive without believing a lie first. No one does something self-destructive without believing a lie first. Now, maybe your preferred avenue of self-destruction is not about donuts, but it might be about conflict. It might be an addiction of some kind. It might be financial habits. I mean, there's all kinds of things that human beings have invented to do that are self-destructive. But every time we behave in a way that is self-destructive, we believe a lie first. No one ever acts in a way that is destructive of their life, their character, their discipline, their integrity, without believing a lie first. No one acts foolishly without first believing something foolish. In August of 2017, a 40-year-old warehouse employee of Tanaruma No Logistics in Japan had a problem to solve. Their problem was that they needed to change a light bulb. And the light bulb was 30 feet off the floor. The only tool that they had available was a forklift. And that forklift could only reach 8 feet high. There were also stacks of pallets around the warehouse. So let's express this as a math problem. If a person is only able to reach a light fixture that is 8 feet overhead and wants to replace a light bulb more than 30 feet overhead, how many 6-inch thick wooden pallets must be stacked under the forks of a forklift to enable a person standing on those pallets to reach the light bulb? The answer is 37. Let's just say that the man reached a higher plane than he meant to. Proverbs was blunt and harsh, but it's true. The loss of life, the loss of freedom, the loss of happiness come through self-deception. And that's why step number 4 of the various 12-step programs that deal with addiction recovery say this. They call us to make a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. I love that phrase, a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. That ability to look in the mirror and be honest about who you see. To understand yourself completely, good, bad, and ugly. To have people in our life that will tell us the truth about us. And the truth is always somewhere in between. We're the most wonderful person on earth or we're the most terrible person on earth. But we need to know the real unvarnished truth about who we are and all of our strengths and weaknesses. One of my favorite prayers, and it's terrible poetry. It's almost cringeworthy in the way that it rhymes. But yet it's one of my favorite prayers, and I find myself praying it often. Jesus, show me the truth about you and the truth about me, because that is the truth that will set me free. Jesus, show me the truth about you and the truth about me, because that is the truth that will set me free. Now, I'm going to say something that you may think is heresy. Not theological heresy, but political heresy. I think it's worth considering that independence is a myth. That autonomy does not actually exist. Bear with me for a minute. Let me make my case. Jesus is pointing out a choice to the people gathered with him that day. On one hand, there is slavery to sin, bondage, and on the other hand, there is being in a bond with our Creator. Bondage or bonded. That's the choice. That's the choice that Jesus places before us. And if you don't understand the way that Jesus put it that day, then how about Bob Dylan? You're going to have to serve somebody. It might be the devil, it might be the Lord, but you're going to have to serve somebody. See, friends, no one serves no one. No one serves no one. Even if we think we have absolute independence and autonomy, we're an island unto ourselves, we don't need anything from anybody. Jesus says, oh, you're not as free as you think you are. Because to the extent that your appetites and impulses and habits drive you, then you're a slave to those things. So independence is not the freedom that we think it is. Jesus says, if you continue in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. Jesus wants us to be free. Jesus does not want bondage for us. Jesus does not want slavery for us. Jesus wants freedom for us. And freedom, he says, is found in truth. Both knowing the truth of who Jesus was and is and what Jesus actually said and actually did. But freedom is also known in knowing Jesus. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. It's not just information, it's about a relationship with a person. I am the way, the truth, and the life. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Freedom comes from knowing the truth about Jesus and from knowing Jesus himself. So friends, I would offer to you my awkwardly rhyming prayer and invite you to make it your own. Jesus, show me the truth about you and the truth about me, for that is the truth that will set me free.